When you go no contact with a narcissistic woman, it may appear on the surface to be an act of calm withdrawal, a quiet decision to step away and reclaim your peace. Psychologically, however, what you are doing is far more disruptive than most people realize. You are not merely removing yourself, you are withdrawing a vital source of emotional regulation. For a narcissistic personality, attention is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Without it, the inner structure begins to destabilize. Carl Jung spoke of the ego as a fragile construct, constantly defending itself against feelings of inferiority and fragmentation. In the narcissistic psyche, this fragility is extreme. Going no contact strikes directly at this vulnerability, producing what psychologists call a narcissistic injury. This injury is not experienced as sadness or reflection, but as humiliation, threat, and loss of control. And when the ego feels cornered, it does not retreat, it retaliates. This is where the danger begins. The sudden absence of you can trigger behaviors that seem disproportionate, even irrational. Smear campaigns, subtle acts of sabotage, and calculated provocations are not emotional outbursts. They are strategic attempts to restore power. In her mind, silence is not neutral. It is an attack, and every attack, real or imagined, demands a response. What makes this particularly dangerous is that retaliation often unfolds quietly, behind the scenes. You may believe you are finally free while narratives are being shaped about you, stories that position her as the victim and you as the villain. This allows her to regain psychological balance without ever facing her own shadow. As Jung warned, what remains unconscious does not disappear, it returns as fate. The true risk, then, is not merely her reaction, but your unpreparedness for it. No contact without awareness can feel like peace, while conflict is simply being relocated out of your sight. Understanding this dynamic does not mean abandoning your boundary. It means strengthening it with clarity, foresight, and inner work. Silence is powerful, but only when it is chosen consciously. Otherwise, it can provoke forces you are not ready to face. Another danger that often goes unnoticed when you go no contact is not emotional, but symbolic. When you leave a narcissistic woman, you do not simply exit a relationship. You abandon the role she assigned you within her inner drama. And because she cannot control you anymore, she controls meaning instead. This is where the smear campaign begins, quietly and methodically. From a Jungian perspective, the narcissistic psyche cannot tolerate the collapse of its preferred self-image. The shadow, those traits she cannot accept in herself, must be projected outward. You become the container for everything she refuses to see: cruelty, instability, selfishness, manipulation. By assigning these traits to you, she protects her ego and restores psychological order. Truth becomes secondary. Coherence is what matters. What makes this especially dangerous is that the story often spreads faster than reality. Mutual friends, family members, colleagues, even people who barely know you, may receive a carefully edited version of events. You are portrayed not as someone who set a boundary, but as someone who abandoned, abused, or emotionally damaged her. And because narcissistic narratives are often delivered with conviction and emotional intensity, they feel believable to those who hear them. The instinctive reaction is to defend yourself, to correct the record, to explain. This is precisely the trap. Engaging in the narrative pulls you back into the psychological field she is trying to control. Jung reminded us that unconscious people believe they are acting freely, when in truth they are driven by unseen forces. The smear campaign is one such force, designed not just to damage your reputation, but to provoke your re-entry. The real danger, then, is losing your center. If you begin living in reaction to false stories, you slowly surrender your autonomy. Silence, when grounded in self-knowledge, becomes a form of integrity. Not every accusation requires a response. Not every lie deserves your energy. Your task is not to win the story, but to outgrow it. When you refuse to carry a shadow that was never yours, the narrative eventually collapses under its own weight. After silence sets in, another danger quietly emerges. one that is far more seductive than overt hostility. When a narcissistic woman senses that no contact might become permanent, she may return, not with aggression, but with apparent insight. This is the hoovering phase, and it is often disguised as growth, remorse, or sudden emotional clarity. To the unprepared mind, it can feel like a miracle. Psychologically, it is anything but. From a Jungian lens, what you are witnessing is not integration of the shadow, but a refinement of the persona. The persona, as Jung described, is the mask we present to the world. A narcissistic personality is often highly skilled at adapting this mask to fit whatever role is most likely to restore control. If anger failed, humility is tried. If dominance failed, vulnerability is performed. The danger lies in confusing performance with transformation. Genuine change is slow, uncomfortable, and marked by consistent behavior over time. Hoovering, by contrast, is urgent and emotionally charged. Apologies arrive without accountability. Insight appears without sustained action. Promises are made not to repair the past, but to reopen the emotional door. And because you once hoped for this version of her, your psyche may lean toward belief. This is where unresolved attachment becomes the weak point. Jung warned that whatever we do not make conscious will meet us as fate. If the trauma bond has not been examined, the hoover feels like destiny, a second chance, a meaningful reconnection. In reality, it is a test, a quiet probe to see whether access to your emotional system still exists. Even responding once can collapse months of progress. The narcissistic psyche does not require full reunion, it only requires proof of influence. Once that proof is obtained, the cycle resumes, often with greater subtlety and control. The real risk then is not her return, but your readiness for it. No contact is not a wall meant to punish. It is a boundary meant to protect your psychological autonomy. If that autonomy is still tied to hope, validation, or unfinished fantasies, the door remains open. True closure is not when she stops reaching out. It is when her reaching out no longer reaches you. One of the most underestimated dangers of going no contact has nothing to do with her behavior at all. It arises within you. When the external chaos ends, an internal withdrawal often begins. The sudden absence of intensity, drama, and emotional unpredictability can feel strangely disorienting. Many people mistake this emptiness for love, or interpret the pain as evidence that they made the wrong decision. Psychologically, what they are experiencing is trauma bond withdrawal. Jung understood that the psyche becomes attached not only to pleasure, but to patterns. A relationship with a narcissistic woman conditions the nervous system through cycles of reward and deprivation. Validation arrives unpredictably, followed by distance or devaluation. Over time, the psyche associates emotional turbulence with connection. When no contact removes this cycle, the mind does not feel relief, it feels loss. This is where the danger becomes subtle. In the quiet, memories begin to distort. The mind selectively recalls moments of warmth while minimizing episodes of harm. Loneliness amplifies fantasy, and fantasy softens reality. Jung warned that when we are cut off from the unconscious, it compensates by creating illusions. The pain you feel is not proof of her importance, it is evidence of an attachment that has not yet been understood. Without awareness, this discomfort pushes people back into familiar suffering. Reaching out, checking social media, or responding to indirect messages becomes a way to soothe the nervous system. The psyche prefers a known pain over an unknown peace, and so no contact is broken, not because healing failed, but because healing was misinterpreted as abandonment. The task here is not resistance, but interpretation. This phase demands inner work, reflection, journaling, solitude, and honest confrontation with why chaos once felt like intimacy. Jung believed that transformation begins when we turn inward instead of acting outward. If this withdrawal is endured consciously, it becomes a rite of passage rather than a relapse. The emptiness you feel is not a void to escape. It is space being created for a self that no longer survives on emotional turbulence. Stay with it long enough, and clarity will replace craving. As no contact continues, another danger often appears. Not through direct communication, but through provocation. When a narcissistic woman can no longer reach you in obvious ways, she may attempt to reach your nervous system indirectly. This is not accidental behavior. It is a form of boundary testing. The goal is simple: to see whether silence is real or merely temporary. These provocations are usually subtle. It's a cryptic social media post timed to be noticed. A mutual friend suddenly asking about you. A staged crisis that somehow reaches your ears. None of these require you to respond directly, yet all of them are designed to awaken emotion. From a psychological perspective, any emotional reaction, even anger or confusion, represents a partial restoration of control. Jung wrote that the psyche seeks completion. When a narcissistic individual senses unfinished business, she may manufacture it. Provocatio N becomes a way to reopen a psychological loop, drawing you back into the dynamic without ever speaking to you. This is why these moments often feel strangely compelling. They are hooks, not messages. The danger lies in misunderstanding what is being tested. It is not your love, your morality, or your compassion. It is your boundary. When you react, even internally, the boundary weakens. When you investigate, explain, or seek clarity, you unknowingly validate the strategy. The narcissistic psyche does not require reconciliation. It requires reaction. What makes this phase particularly difficult is the illusion of control. You may tell yourself you are only observing, only checking, only staying informed, but Jung warned that what we believe we are controlling may already be controlling us. Attention is energy, and wherever attention flows, influence follows. True strength at this stage is not aggression or confrontation, but restraint. The work is internal, recognizing the urge to react and choosing not to feed it. This is not passivity. It is conscious self-governance. Each ignored provocation reinforces your autonomy and weakens the need for escalation. When no emotional response is available, the testing stops. Not because understanding was reached, but because the system no longer produces results. The moment you stop reacting is the moment control truly ends. The final and perhaps most overlooked danger of going no contact is the belief that distance alone will bring closure. Silence feels decisive, even empowering, and in many ways it is. But psychologically, no contact is not an ending. It is a pause. Without inner engagement, the relationship continues to live on, not externally, but within the psyche. Jung reminded us that separation from a person does not equal separation from the inner image we carry of them. If that image remains charged with emotion, longing, resentment, or unresolved questions, then the bond persists at an unconscious level. This is why some people remain mentally entangled long after physical contact has ended. The danger is mistaking external silence for internal freedom. In this state, no contact becomes avoidance rather than integration. The mind pushes the experience away instead of understanding it. Patterns are not examined, wounds are not interpreted, projections are left intact. And what is left intact is destined to repeat. Jung was clear on this point. What is not made conscious will return, not as memory, but as destiny. This is where many people unknowingly sabotage their own healing. They wait for time to do the work that only awareness can do. They hope the other person will fade, when in reality it is the inner dynamic that must be transformed. Without reflection, the psyche may seek a familiar structure elsewhere, another intense connection, another emotionally unavailable partner, another cycle that feels different but ends the same. True closure requires participation. It means asking difficult questions. Why did this dynamic feel compelling? What parts of myself were activated, ignored, or sacrificed? What shadow within me resonated with hers? These are not questions of blame, but of responsibility. And responsibility, in Jungian terms, is the gateway to individuation. No contact creates the space for this work, but it does not perform it for you. That work is inward, slow, and often uncomfortable. Yet it is the difference between escape and transformation. Silence ends the noise, but insight ends the cycle. And only when the lesson is integrated does freedom truly begin.